Hello there, this is Steve here in Sydney of the Lay Gnosis website, truebluehealer.com, where you can activate your own divine spark in just 20 minutes with immediate physical evidence and later 2 types of physical evidence. And you'll have a wonderful life. It's a sleigh ride, a magical sleigh ride through a magic forest as you awaken to what you really are. Now, what I want to talk about is a difference between Canada and Australia. Both former British colonies. State of Ontario has apparently passed a motion, I don't know if that's law yet, but the motion was unanimously passed that Islamophobia could become a crime. Now this is classic Marxism, where they turn common sense on its head. They literally invert common sense. And you can ridicule Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, you can ridicule Scientology, but you can't ridicule Islam. You can't say anything critical. That's the path they're headed down. I don't know if they'll ever score convictions because it comes down to the definition of hate speech, because it's often tied to human rights commission type thinking, and human rights commissions are generally stacked with Marxists who, in Australia, they've never been actually able to convict anyone of hate speech because there's no actual definition of it. But you can see that'll be part of the process. And it looks like the New World Order, the internationalists, the globalists, they want to have a world with just Muslims because they're easier to control. They have lower IQs, they don't read things, they're easier to bluff and stampede into obedience. That's what the New World Order, the globalists want. But I don't think you'll be able to do that either, because unruly people are actually very difficult to rule, I think, if you're happy to live with a crime rate that's 20 times higher imported from the Middle East. So, now what's the difference in Australia? Well, newspaper articles today are actually saying the opposite, that we should be abolishing our Human Rights Commission because it gets stacked full of Marxists. Newspaper articles just today, following up on the army thing yesterday that was in the newspapers, where the army's been told that being a white male Anglo-Saxon and Christian to boot is the most disgusting thing on earth, and your individual heroism in battle is completely wrong by Marxist standards, and you should learn to include everybody. And we all have to get medals for the same event, right? Okay. This is classic Marxism, inverting common sense and destroying the meritocracy that our society runs on, basically. Mark Latham, I'll find a picture of him for you, is one of the many washed up old leaders that failed in our two-party system. He was unsuitable as a leader, but he got the job because, that was 20 years ago, he got the job because he was the last man standing who hadn't been leader yet. And they had a string of leadership failures before that, and he was another failure. I diagnosed him as having Asperger's, but some 15, 20 years later, he seems to have grown out of it. And now there's a kind of unexpected reversal. Female columnists, female journalists praise him as the lone alpha male. They admire him for taking apart feminists, greenies and Marxists and communists and calling them out for what they really are. So post-leadership, as just a newspaper columnist, he's now a potent opinion leader, and he's saying get rid of the Human Rights Commission because it's basically used as a club by Marxists to clobber average working class conservative people. In his article, I'll see if I can find it for you, it's in the Daily Telegraph, which is hated by leftists. They call us Telegraph readers. There's 1 million of them in a city of 4 million, right? A lot of people read the Daily Telegraph every day, and it sells to the conservative average person who's basically had no interest in politics until recently, when you suddenly realise that every aspect of your life has been penetrated by Marxists, from preschool homosexual training and all that stuff, and safe schools where children are supposed to be shown how to do homosexual sex and dress up in the opposite gender's clothing and all that, and people have had a gut full of that. I've actually seen it in McDonald's where people are loudly discussing it on expensive mobile phone calls to their friends. Have you seen this transgender toilet rubbish, stuff like that? I've actually seen that, heard it in McDonald's more than once. So the disgust with gender politics, identity politics, which is all about Marxism. That's what Marxism really is. It's about divide and conquer, set everyone against each other in groups. It's now having a great effect on average Australians. That's the people who typically are very happy or very hard-working, immersed in their personal lives and assuming wrongly that the government was always doing the best thing by them. Mark Latham also says, basically is like an opinion leader, and he's pointing out that the two institutionalised parties have both fallen to lobby groups, international business groups, Marxist groups, leftists telling our army what to do, that heroism is bad for you in an army and you really shouldn't do that, that sort of thing. And there's a thing yesterday in the paper about it, and he's saying there's now 1 million people voting for Pauline Hanson. She's got that many votes. Now, she's not a great leader. She's not going to be a saviour in that sense. They really need another leader. It might be Cory Bernardi, but he's seceded from the Liberal Party to run his own party, but he doesn't have a great following yet. He's a fundamentalist Christian. He's opposed to gay marriage and all that sort of stuff. And by the way, compared to Canada, gay marriage, it's not federally... what do you call it? What's the word for it? It's not federally in law yet, because the left, amazingly, won't allow the federal government to have a plebiscite on it, because the left are dead scared of losing to the conservative Australian people who just firmly believe that a marriage, a majority of them, that a marriage is between a man and a woman. And if you want some other kind of union, call it a different name. Okay? I hear this in McDonald's, okay? People chat about it, looking up from their daily telegraphs. Right? So it's kind of fascinating how we are diverging from Canada. Trudeau's insane Marxist self-destruction of his own country. We're watching it from here, and Australians in Sydney are thinking along an opposite track, and a newspaper is leading the opinion on this. That's the Daily Telegraph. So, the Long March through all the institutions of the Western world was conceived by the Frankfurt Institute, a bunch of Marxists, after the spectacular failure of traditional Marxism, which thought that the working class would overturn the capitalist system, decapitate their governments, decapitate the ownership and leadership of all their big corporations, and Jewish bankers would just walk in and buy them all up at 10 cents in the dollar. That was the original Marxist plan, and it didn't work. Thus, in 1923, for about the next 10 years, they developed cultural Marxism, which is basically about criticising and tearing strips and destroying everything you can intellectually. So they began by infiltrating anthropology and turning that into a Marxist philosophy. And today we have the process still going on, and it's just as crazy. We have feminist glaciology. Believe it, I'm not making that up. There's feminist glaciology, there's feminist geology, because they say they all suffer for being male-dominated, you see. So it's a war against men, as usual, a war against society, and all they seem to want to do is destroy everything. That's their long-term goal. They are succeeding. And what's been happening seems to be that father deficient people going to university are just too gullible, and the machine system of Marxist production just turns them out into Marxist activists wholesale at university. So you basically you come out with $100,000 to $150,000 debt, and you want to attack every aspect of your society, and you might do it for the rest of your life, and you'll be unemployable and be unable to pay off your student loan because you've got this wonderful SJW degree. It's destroying the Western world. Universities have to change. One way of changing is to put Jordan Peterson as a compulsory course at every university. He's now available via distance learning over YouTube, and mercifully his very long lectures have been broken up into bite-sized chunks. He's often a lot to take on for 1 or 2 hours at a time, but you can watch him for half an hour, you can watch him for 20 minutes, that sort of a thing. He's good for that. In case you don't know, Marxism is part of the philosophy course. I remember my sister had to do it 20, 30 years ago. Marxism is just one of the many isms you have to learn about in a philosophy course, where you could learn transcendentalism, you could learn existentialism, you had to learn to write essays on Gnosticism, all sorts of obscure philosophical subjects. And one of the isms you could do a big study of was Marxism, which is pretty easy because it's all dogma, with no basis in reality at all. There isn't a single Marxist state in the world that everybody flocks to and is desperate to live there. It's a hell on earth. It's an ultimate hell on earth dystopia is Marxism. That's what they're all heading for. And they want to take you down the track. And it's utilising the juvenile delinquent tendencies of rebellious teenagers who gullibly turn up at university. If you're going to learn Marxism at university as one of your philosophy picks, the whole idea is to stop you being a complete nerd coming out of university and that you've learned to grapple with intangibles. Well, that's been a failure because people do not question Marxism enough. So there's needed an anti-Marxism course, which is what Jordan Peterson supplies from Canada. He's now available all over the world. So it's kind of like cloning him and putting him at every university. That could be done. That could be done. It's already available almost by accident, okay? He was astonished himself at his own success, where he's got a class of 150 people at university, but some of his first videos got 50,000 views, and he realised he was getting an audience that wanted to hear what he said. Maybe we need more people like Jordan Peterson to counter the wholesale production of Marxist social justice warriors destroying their own society with a mysterious silence toward other societies. Very strange. They only attack their own society, tearing strips off it at every opportunity. The dreadful courses they're giving to Australian Army is a good example of it, right? So, now, a little word of wisdom from the Corbett report about the left versus right thing, the so-called dialectic. Basically, left and right are at each other's throats these days with ever more vigour. The Corbett report points out that your neighbours, no matter how much you detest them, are not your true enemy, that it's actually the elites who are promoting all this stuff with their media control, etc. So there's something to meditate upon. My suggestion is, this is just a thought experiment. I suspect the world would be a much better place if we could just drone strike a few meetings of the heads like the CFR, the Davos, Bilderbergers, etc. Because it's our crackpot leadership that's promoting all this globalism stuff, which is basically ruining the world and wants to turn it into a gulag archipelago reminiscent of the Soviet Union. Okay, so that's just my little suggestion. What do you think about that? Would you do it? Would you be part of such an operation? I don't know. It's certainly just a thought experiment, but it's our insane leadership that is the problem, promoting the Marxist disease right through the Western world, basically to commit white genocide, to get rid of these evil white Christians and replace them with Muslims, basically. Is that the world they want? A world with a much higher crime rate? A world with much more ignorance? People who don't read books? That's basically what the Middle Eastern Muslims seem to be, with their low average IQs, such as 83 in Saudi Arabia, and they're the highest Muslim IQ in the Middle Eastern world. Everyone else has got lower average IQ than that. So they want a very low IQ world with a much smaller population. Bill Gates just got thrown out of India. That was a good thing. It's been seen that his vaccination programs that gave, I think it was 50,000 Indian people polio, he's been thrown out of India allegedly for his, he's basically just an agent for Big Pharma selling vaccines to the most populous country in the world, India, right? So he's been thrown out of India. No more government interactions with him at all. So that's a globalist initiative that has been stalled in the great nation of India. That's another little victory, I think. Notice how Donald Trump is also opposed to Big Pharma and the high cost of drugs in the United States. The truth is Americans are one of the sickest countries in the world in terms of health rating. I think they rate about 45th, yet they have the most expensive drugs in the world. There's something wrong with that. You can go over the border in Canada and get drugs 75% cheaper, roughly. So everyone's out to get Donald Trump. A man who speaks common sense. Golly Miss Molly. So just coming back to the concept of how do you deal with Marxism, do you think they are teachable, that you can debate them into a more common sense viewpoint? I write them off as mindless nihilists who just call you racist, xenophobe, etc., bigot, which are really just Marxist expletives. It's just like calling you, it's a pseudo-intellectual version of calling you a bastard. Okay, that's all it is, and it isn't very smart at all to call everyone a racist for having an opinion about almost anything. So, but do you think Marxists can be reasoned with and be persuaded to have a more intelligent policy toward their fellow countrymen? I have serious doubts about that, because they seem to get brain damage in university where Marxism takes hold of them, and they just love this simplistic pseudo-religious jingoism of Marxism. It seems to be all they want for their immature brains. And there's one report on the Alex Jones InfoWars, an explanation of why there are so many sort of zombies in lockstep coming out of American universities, is the very high consumption of prescription drugs, psychotropic pharmaceuticals. The estimate in the article was 1 in 4 students. You've only got to say something to a student counsellor like, I'm having trouble concentrating in exams, my grades are falling. And they'll say words to the effect, oh, you must have a biochemical imbalance. Go and see the doctor over there, he'll give you a script for Risperdal. It's an amphetamine that's going to perk you up, make you feel better and perform better. And a lifetime of pharmaceutical psychotropic drug taking then begins. And this could be why they're all so always running for safe spaces and being triggered and throwing fits in corridors and tantrums and all that. It could be the drug culture of American universities, which is being used to destroy our up-and-coming generation of young people. Young people are casualties of this, if it's happening, if it's true. I've only seen one report about this. I'd like to see more discussion on it. Can I just add here for you that an observation that I suspect you can't escape it, that sneaking up on you is something called the flat earth concept out of YouTube, and wherever you go there's always somebody talking about, you should come and look at the flat earth channel, right? We really know the truth about everything. That is cultural Marxism trying to install in you as much self-doubt and confusion as possible. It's just another aspect of cultural Marxism. They're being paid to do it, and it's utter rubbish. It's based on conspiratorial thinking that NASA's doing the whole thing, that sort of stuff. And gullible people will fall for it, and believe me, the world is round. It's just cultural Marxism sneaking up on you again. So you can block them, delete them, tell them to get lost, hit them with expletives, whatever you think is appropriate to deal with the cultural Marxism of the flat earth concept, okay? One last thing, I'll just put a proposition to you, just as a sort of a little challenge. You can write something below this video about it, see what you think. Can you agree, disagree, say something better? It goes like this. A political philosopher once said that democracy is a breeding ground for Bolshevism and Marxism to proliferate unchecked. Would you agree that's what's happened? Tolerant democracy has enabled extremism to flourish and infiltrate all of our institutions in the West, from preschool to play school to academia to state government, local government to federal governments, all over the Western world. Our tolerant democracy has allowed that to happen. Now, that political philosopher I will not name, but he said it was a major flaw of tolerant democracy. So do you think, here's the proposition, I ask you to put a comment below, maybe we've got to abandon democracy for a while to get rid of Marxism. It's too tolerant. We may have to become a little less tolerant, because we seem to have pathological over-tolerance, doing ourselves a disservice as a society. I think the Western world is in peril for being too tolerant, too soft, too kind. So, what do you think about that? Would you be in favour of something a little more firm than tolerant democracy? What about being less tolerant of people who want to destroy the whole of our society? What do you think about that? I'll leave you with that thought.